I never imagined my baby's crying could get me evicted. But that's exactly what my neighbor Karen and the HOA tried to do to us. $87,000 later. See how I fought back against this shocking case of housing discrimination and won. But at what cost? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. I remember the day my husband, Jack, and I moved into our new condo, like it was yesterday. We were so excited to start our life together with our baby girl. Lily, she was only a few months old, and the light of our lives. The condo was perfect for us. Cozy, but with enough space for a growing family. Jack and I spent weeks getting everything just right, hanging pictures, arranging furniture, and painting Lily's room a soft yellow. We were exhausted from all the work and adjusting to being new parents, but we were so happy. Then one afternoon, not long after we moved in, there was a sudden loud pounding at our door. It startled Lily awake from her nap, and she began to cry. I scooped her up and opened the door, completely taken aback by what I saw. There stood a woman with a sour expression, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "I'm Karen, from downstairs," she said sharply, "and we need to talk about that baby of yours." I stared at her, confused. Lily's cries grew louder, and I gently bounced her, trying to soothe her. "I'm sorry, is everything okay?" I asked. Karen's frown deepened. "No, everything is not okay," she snapped. "That child's incessant crying is disruptive and completely unacceptable. I didn't move into a nice condo to have my peace, and quiet constantly disturbed by a shrieking baby." I was stunned by the harshness of her words. "She's a baby," I said, trying to stay calm. "Babies cry sometimes. We're doing our best to keep her happy, but we can't stop her from crying entirely." Karen seemed unmoved by my explanation. "Your best isn't good enough," she said icily. "If you can't keep that baby quiet, I'll make sure there are consequences. I have connections on the HOA board, and I won't hesitate to use them. Consider this a warning." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her condo, slamming the door behind her. I stood in my doorway, my heart racing and my arms tightly around Lily. I had no idea what this woman was capable of, but I knew I would do whatever it took to protect my family. Over the next couple weeks, it became clear that Karen wouldn't be backing down. She complained constantly, cornering me in the hallway to lecture me on proper parenting, and slipping angry notes under our door. Every time Lily made a peep, I grew anxious, wondering if Karen was on the phone tattling to the HOA. It all came to a head when we got a stern warning letter from the Homeowners Association, saying there had been complaints about excessive noise disturbances coming from our unit. I was equal parts angry and afraid. How could they call a baby's cries a noise disturbance? Were they really going to punish us for having an infant? I brought my concerns to Jack, and he could see how upset I was. "Don't let that busybody Karen get to you," he said, rubbing my shoulders. "We're not doing anything wrong. The HOA will see that. It's going to be okay." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the anxiety churning in my stomach. I started tiptoeing around my own home, shushing Lily almost constantly, wincing every time she made a sound. Deep down, I knew this was no way to live, in fear of my own neighbor and the HOA. But what were we supposed to do? We had sunk our savings into this condo and couldn't afford to move again so soon. Late one night, after finally getting Lily down after hours of crying, I collapsed onto the couch feeling utterly drained. But no sooner had I sat down than I heard Karen's voice drifting up from the vent. My exhausted frustration boiled over into anger. How dare she scrutinize our every move like this? What gave her the right? At that moment, listening to her self-righteous complaints, something shifted inside me. I was done being bullied and intimidated into silence. Karen wanted a fight? Well, now she had one. I wouldn't let her drive us from our home. Lily's cries weren't just normal. They were the beautiful sound of our family living our lives. And I was ready to fight tooth and nail for our right to do just that. But I knew I couldn't just charge into battle haphazardly. If I wanted to beat Karen and the HOA at their own game, I needed to be strategic and gather evidence to support our case. How could I prove we were being unfairly targeted and harassed? Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Karen complained to the HOA about us all the time. She said that Lily's crying was against the rules and we had to keep her quiet no matter what. Can you believe it? Lily was just a tiny baby, not some loud music blasting all night. Babies cry sometimes and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just part of life. But Karen didn't see it that way. She thought she could control everything and everyone around her. And unfortunately, the HOA seemed to agree with her, even though they had never said anything to us before. Suddenly, we got a warning letter in the mail. The letter said there had been numerous complaints about excessive noise disturbances coming from our unit. It warned that if we didn't address the issue, we could face fines or even eviction. I was so mad I could barely see straight. This was crazy. How could they threaten to kick us out of our own home just because our baby cried sometimes? It didn't make any sense. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let Karen and the HOA push us around like this. So first, I wrote a long letter back to the HOA explaining the situation. I told them that all the complaints were coming from Karen, our downstairs neighbor. I said she had been harassing and bullying us ever since we moved in, all because of normal baby noises. I pointed out that a crying baby doesn't violate any rules or laws. I also did some research on the Fair Housing Act and included that in my letter too. It's a law that makes it illegal to discriminate against families with kids when it comes to housing. You can't refuse to rent to them, charge them extra fees, limit their use of facilities, or hold them to stricter standards. And you definitely can't evict them just for having a baby. I spent hours writing and rewriting my letter until it was perfect. Then I marched down to the HOA office and delivered it, right to the property manager in person. I wanted to make sure they took it seriously. The manager seemed surprised by my letter. He said he would look into it and thanked me for bringing it to his attention. Maybe Karen had been telling them a bunch of lies about us? I don't know, but I felt a bit relieved as I headed back to my condo. Surely they would see how unreasonable she was being now. I really thought my letter would put an end to all this drama. I figured the HOA would realize how ridiculous Karen's complaints were and tell her to back off. We had done nothing wrong, and I had spelled that out for them plain and simple. But I was wrong. I had no idea how far Karen and the HOA would take things, or the nightmare that was still to come. Because a week later, I came home from the grocery store and found a new notice taped to our front door. As I read it, my heart nearly stopped. Notice of eviction proceedings, the heading read in big, bold letters. The letter stated that the HOA was moving to terminate our lease and evict us from the property due to repeated lease violations. It felt like the world was spinning. I couldn't believe my eyes. They were really trying to kick us out, all because of a crying baby. I was speechless, shocked, and scared all at once. With shaking hands, I called for my husband. "Jack!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Come here, you need to see this." When he read the eviction notice, his face turned white as a ghost. Tears started pouring down my face. What were we going to do? Where would we go? How could we fight this? At that moment, I was terrified, overwhelmed, and completely unsure of what to do next as the eviction notice crumpled in my fist. I couldn't believe this was happening. Karen's constant complaints about Lily's crying had led to the HOA actually trying to evict us from our own home. It was unbelievable and so unfair. How could they kick out a family with a newborn baby? Shaking with anger, I marched straight over to the HOA office first thing the next morning, eviction notice in hand. I demanded to speak to the board immediately about this outrageous situation. When I finally got in to see them, I slammed the notice down on the table. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked, my voice trembling with fury. "You're trying to evict us because our baby cries sometimes. Are you serious right now?" The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at each other. Finally, the president cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson, we've received numerous complaints from your neighbor. Karen and you failed to address the issue after our warning. We have to uphold the community rules." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Numerous complaints? They're all from one person, Karen. She's been harassing us non-stop since we moved in. Babies cry, that's a fact of life. It's not like we're throwing wild parties till 3 a.m. We argued back and forth, my frustration mounting with each patronizing response they gave. They kept citing the noise regulations but refused to listen to reason. "This is discrimination. Plain and simple," I said, my hands shaking as I pointed at each board member. "You cannot evict someone for having a child." "That's illegal!" But they wouldn't budge. The president just folded his hands calmly. "We have to act on the complaints we receive. I'm sorry, but the decision is final. You have 30 days to vacate the unit." Tears of anger and disbelief welled up in my eyes. I couldn't even form words. How was this happening? I wanted to scream, to make them see how cruel and unethical this was. But I could tell they had made up their minds. I gathered up the notice with as much dignity as I could muster. "This isn't over," I declared, my voice shaking with emotion. "You can't get away with this. I won't let you do this to my family." I stormed out, slamming the door behind me as the board members muttered to each other. My mind raced as I walked to my car, still reeling from shock and rage. Karen was standing on her porch, arms crossed, a smug look on her pinched face as I got in my car. Had she been watching, waiting to see me get kicked out? What kind of heartless person targets a family with a newborn like this? I felt utterly wronged and powerless in that moment, but I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. I refused to be bullied out of the home we had been so excited to make our own. I didn't know quite what my next move was yet, but I knew I needed to fight back. As I pulled out of the driveway, Karen called out snidely, "Guess you'll have to find somewhere else to let your brat scream all day and night. This neighborhood will be much better off without you." Gritting my teeth, I resisted the urge to yell back and just drove off, my mind already racing ahead to what I could do next. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let this stand. Karen and that HOA needed to be held accountable for this blatant discrimination. But how was I going to fight this? I was just one person, a new mom already overwhelmed and exhausted. How do you take on an entire HOA board and a vengeful neighbor intent on destroying your peace? I needed help, and I needed a plan. Racking my brain as I drove home to break the news to my husband, an idea began to take shape. If they wanted to try to force us out, I was going to expose the injustice for the whole world to see. I was so confused and upset, I didn't know what to do. My husband Jack tried to comfort me, but I could tell he was worried too. We had just moved into our new home with our baby girl Lily, and now we were being kicked out? It didn't make any sense. All because our neighbor Karen didn't like hearing Lily cry sometimes. It wasn't fair. I called my mom and told her what happened. She said, "Honey, that sounds really wrong. I think you need to talk to a lawyer." I knew she was right, but lawyers are expensive. Money was already tight with the new baby. But what choice did we have? We couldn't just let ourselves be bullied out of our home. So I started researching online, trying to learn everything I could about housing laws and discrimination. I read that landlords and HOAs can't refuse to rent to or evict families just for having kids. There's a law called the Fair Housing Act that prohibits that. The more I read, the more I realized how wrong and illegal the HOA's actions were. I found a fair housing organization in our area and gave them a call. They connected me with a lawyer named David who specialized in cases like ours. I told him the whole story. The constant complaints from Karen, the threatening letters from the HOA, the eviction notice. He was shocked and angered by what we had been through. "They can't get away with this," he told me. "It's a clear violation of your rights. No one should have to fear losing their home just because their baby cries. Don't worry, we'll fight this and hold them accountable." His confidence gave me hope, but I was still scared. What if we lost the case? What if the judge sided with Karen and the HOA? Going up against them in court felt like David versus Goliath. But then David showed me evidence he had uncovered. It turned out our building's corporate bylaws had no restrictions on children, or noise from children. Karen had been complaining about other families with kids too, and the HOA never took action against anyone else. They were singling us out. We also discovered that Karen's unit was illegally built. It didn't have proper soundproofing required by building codes, which is why she could hear Lily so easily. But instead of fixing her own unit, she expected us to keep our baby silent. The HOA knew about these issues but ignored them. It was neglect, plain and simple. As David compiled all this evidence for our case, I began to feel more optimistic. We had the law and the facts on our side, but I still worried what a battle this would be. These people had already shown they would stop at nothing to get their way. The stress was really getting to me. I wasn't sleeping and it was hard to focus on caring for Lily. Jack did his best to help, but I could tell it was wearing on him too. Our perfect new home now felt tainted by all this ugliness. Would we ever feel safe and welcome here again? When the local newspaper reached out for our story, I was hesitant at first. I didn't want to escalate the conflict, but David encouraged me to speak out. "People need to know this is happening. You could help other families by shining a light on this injustice," he said. So I agreed to an interview. Seeing our story in the newspaper was surreal. Suddenly, people all over town and even other cities were talking about what the HOA had done to us. Most were shocked and outraged. A few cruel people sided with Karen, but overall, we received an outpouring of support. It made me feel less alone. The HOA board was livid about the negative media coverage. They threatened to sue the newspaper and us for defamation. "Let them try," David said. "The truth is on our side." That gave me courage. I knew we had to keep fighting, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who had ever been bullied by those in power. Finally, after weeks of preparation, we had our day in court. As we arrived at the courthouse, a swarm of reporters waited outside. My stomach churned with nerves, but I held my head high. I was done being pushed around. I was ready to stand up for my family and my rights, come what may. The judge called us into the courtroom. Karen and the HOA's high-powered lawyer sat at the other table, glaring at us. My heart raced as the bailiff swore us in. This was it, our chance to tell our story and expose the truth. I took a deep breath, squeezed Jack's hand, and stepped up to the witness stand, ready for battle. The big day had finally arrived. We were going to court to fight against the unfair eviction that Karen and the HOA had tried to hit us with. My heart was pounding as we walked into the courtroom. I clutched my husband Jack's hand tightly and held little Lily close in my arms. This was it, our chance to stand up to the bullies and show them they couldn't push us around. My lawyer gave me an encouraging nod as he stood up to make his opening arguments. He spoke powerfully, telling the jury how the HOA and Karen had discriminated against us and broken the law, all because we had a baby who sometimes cried. As I listened to him lay out all the evidence we had gathered, I started to feel a flicker of hope. We had documents showing how Karen had constantly complained about us for no good reason. We had a copy of the HOA rules which clearly said they couldn't evict people for having crying babies. And we had testimony from other neighbors about how Karen was always causing drama and trying to control everyone. When it was Karen's turn on the witness stand, my lawyer was ready. He asked her tough question after tough question, catching her in lies and exposing how ridiculous she was being. So you think it's okay to harass a family and try to kick them out of their home because a baby is crying? He asked incredulously. Karen sputtered and tried to argue, but she just looked foolish. I had to hide my smile as I watched her squirm. Next, the HOA board members each took the stand, and one by one my lawyer grilled them too. He got them to admit that they didn't follow their own rules when they sent us that eviction notice. He made them look either totally incompetent or like they were in cahoots with Karen. I shook my head in disbelief at how they tried to twist their way out of it. As the trial went on, I took the stand myself. My voice shook a little as I described the pain and fear this whole nightmare had caused for me and my family. We were just trying to settle into our new home with our beautiful baby girl, I explained, dabbing at my eyes. But Karen and the HOA made that impossible. They treated us like criminals when we did nothing wrong. It was so scary to think we might lose our home and not be able to protect our daughter. I looked the jury right in the eyes as I spoke, imploring them to understand. In his closing argument, my lawyer drove all our points home. This young family was victimized and almost lost everything, thanks to the cruelty and illegal actions of Karen and the HOA board, he declared passionately, pointing right at them. They broke the law, they violated their own policies, and they tried to destroy a mother, a father, and a helpless baby. All for the crime of being human and having human needs. This is unacceptable. His words were powerful and I could see the jury taking it all in. Finally, after what felt like forever, the jury filed back in with their verdict. In the case of the plaintiff versus the HOA and Karen, we find in favor of the plaintiff, the foreman read in a clear voice. Relief crashed over me like a wave. We did it, we won! But it got even better. The jury awarded us $87,000 in damages. The judge said it was to make up for all the pain, fear, and hardship we went through. Plus, the judge threw out that wrongful eviction and told the HOA and Karen they had to leave us alone from now on. I couldn't help it. I burst into tears. After everything we went through, we finally had justice. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt so thankful and relieved. Jack gave me a big hug and kiss. You were amazing up there, he said proudly. You stood up for our family. I smiled through my tears and held Lily extra tight. Our baby girl was just being a baby, and now she was safe to grow and thrive in our home, no matter how much she cried. It had been a battle, but we emerged stronger. Karen and her unfair schemes had been shut down for good. Our little family could have our happily ever after in our new home, just like we deserved. I knew the scars from the pain Karen caused wouldn't heal overnight, but we would move forward together and make this a home filled with love, and yes, sometimes with crying, and that was more than okay.